Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Okay, so there's obviously a little bit of a misdirection situation happening right now. There's so much information dropping and so many polls dropping, but the left wants you to ignore all of it and focus your gaze solely on one poll and one poll alone, and that's the Jan Seltzer Des Moines Iowa Register poll, suggesting that Kamala Harris is making incredible gains out of nowhere. It's an interesting strategy, but again, I think it's a distraction. Why look there and doom and gloom over a single outlier poll when pretty much everything else is telling a completely different story? I don't know about you guys, but my thought process is kind of in line with what Donald Trump is saying.
The polls up, but I think it's much more than the polls. No, the polls, I'm telling you, you can make those suckers sing. You get the right pollster, you can do, and you really do inflict damage, when you do like this person from Iowa. Today, the election essentially is really, we're talking Turkey, comes out with a poll different from every other poll because it wasn't even in question. It's really the opposite way. I'm way up. If you look at 3-4 months ago, Dan, I was losing states that now are walks, they're now walks. And I think you're going to have that here. It's called suppression. They suppress, and it actually should be illegal because it's, in many ways, it's worse than the written word, which these guys do quite well, actually.
I think it's a suppression poll, a push poll. They want you so desperately to focus on that one ridiculous result, but I'm more focused on the flurry of information and data currently releasing showing that Donald Trump is headed towards a red wave electoral landslide. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean by that. Here's a rapid fire cannon polling analysis video. I got like 10 to 15 things to show you guys, so let's very quickly do this one by one. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Okay, so first I want to start off with a couple of Battleground state polls here. We're going to first start off with Atlas Intel. This is their final Battleground state poll, and let's pull up the numbers right on screen here. Take a look. Yep, you don't need to clean your glasses. Your vision is not betraying you. According to the most accurate pollster from 2020, Donald Trump just isn't doing well in the battlegrounds. Supposedly, he's winning in every single state, and a lot of these polls are showing him above the 50% mark. Just take a look at these leads. North Carolina, he leads by 3.4, Georgia 2.5, Arizona 6.5, Nevada 5.5, Wisconsin +1, Michigan 1.5, and Pennsylvania 1.8. Every single state, friends, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that a 300+ electoral victory landslide is very much in play. There's all this focus on Iowa supposedly flipping, a red state that Trump usually carries by 9 to 10 points, that only holds 6 electoral votes, and that's supposedly the biggest news. Yeah, not so sure about that one. I think this is much bigger news, but I don't know, call me crazy. We've also got a poll from Patriot Polling that shows Trump competing and leading in almost every battleground state, and keep in mind this poll was only sampling registered voters, meaning this result is probably underestimating Donald Trump's actual lead, but if you extrapolate this to the map, that's a 287 electoral vote victory. Again, the left wants to hyper-fixate and hyper-focus on the Iowa poll, as if that's the story, that's the state that's gonna flip. But again, that isn't the story. You know what the real story is? That Virginia might be in play. Let's go back to 2020. How big was Joe Biden's lead in Virginia in 2020? I'm sure a lot of you guys remember. Joe Biden carried the state by 10.1%. In other words, you could call Virginia a deep blue Democrat state, right? Well, maybe not so much anymore. The latest poll released by Chisholm Strategy shows a 45 to 45% tie between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Yeah, you see where I'm going with this. The conversation surrounding a state flipping, I think, should be revolving around Virginia, just like we saw with the race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, not Iowa. And by the way, Chisholm Strategies is also suggesting that the Virginia Senate race is within 1 point, showing Kane at 46% and Hung Kao at 45%. Yeah, I'd say that's certainly newsworthy now, isn't it? A Republican Senate candidate who's down in the betting markets as essentially having a near 0% chance of winning, that's Hung Kao, might actually perform quite admirably and might even win. Now, of course, there's a lot of undecided voters, and Chisholm Strategy isn't the most known pollster, so I'm not going to run too far with this data, but it's certainly interesting and newsworthy now, isn't it? And it also seems to fall in line with what the trend is suggesting, that Republicans are making incredible gains the closer we get to Election Day. And at the end of the day, what it's all going to come down to is low propensity voters and first-time voters. And this right here is where I think Democrats might be in some seriously big trouble. Let me first start off with showing you some data from the latest New York Times poll. Eric Doherty breaks it all down. He writes, new Battleground states poll. Voters who have voted in the 2022-2024 primaries. Kamala Harris is up +3. Voters who voted in 2022, but not in the primaries, it's a tie. 2020 general election only voters, meaning people who didn't vote in the primaries or in the midterms, but are general election voters, Trump is supposedly leading by 12 points. And then with voters who have no voting record, in other words, first-time voters, supposedly Trump is up by +19. At the end of the day, it's who is turning over new voters and motivating low-propensity voters. And that seems to be Donald Trump. That sentiment was also echoed by James Blair, Trump's 2024 political director. Take a look.
There's something else that's worth pointing out, I think, that the polling doesn't necessarily pick up, which is the voter registration gains for Republicans in Arizona specifically, which is also a national trend. But 4 years ago, going into the election on the book close, there was about 130,000 more registered Republicans in the state of Arizona than Democrats. Today, that number is over 280,000. And a lot of these pollsters, even when you average it all out, they set their sample to look like the 2020 electorate. But the fact is, these battleground states, and particularly Arizona, they've all moved 3 to 5 points to the right. So that's a great sign for President Trump. Obviously, he's brought a ton of new voters into the party. And I think that's something that the polling may not even be picking up, despite it showing him very strong as it stands right now.
Again, pretty much saying the same thing in all of the battleground states. They seem to be pretty confident that they're turning out more low to mid propensity voters than Kamala Harris is across the board. Not to mention, voter registration is obviously moving in one direction. In other words, the polls might be missing the mark entirely. In fact, the New York Times even admits that in their latest polling results.
I want to read this from Nate Cohn. This is on the New York Times polling that I showed our viewers here. Across these final polls, white Democrats were 16% likelier to respond than white Republicans. That's a larger disparity than our earlier polls this year, and it's not much better than our final polls in 2020, even with the pandemic over. It raises the possibility that the polls could underestimate Mr. Trump yet again. We do a lot to account for this, but in the end, there are no guarantees.
You know, it's just looking like the polling results, or at least the mainstream polling results, this election season are likely to be significantly off. Personally, I'm just struggling to wrap my head around it. You have all this amazing bullish voter registration data and even early voting data. I mean, look at what's happening in Arizona, for instance. Red Eagle Politics breaks it down. Today in history in 2020, Democrats led by 19,000. In 2022, they led by 15,000. This is early voting data. But fast forward to present time today, Republicans are supposedly ahead by 182,000. Yet Democrats keep telling us that Arizona is close and Kamala's making a play for it? It seems rather unbelievable now, doesn't it? Again, I think the story is less that Arizona's in play and Kamala's going to take the state, and more that Arizona is trending significantly rightward, and not only that Donald Trump might end up carrying the state, but that he might end up carrying Kari Lake. You know, again, after months of doom and gloom. Quote, Kari Lake is unelectable. It now seems as though that race is completely flipped, and Kari Lake's going to run away with it. We have yet again another poll showing Kari Lake leapfrogging Ruben Gallego. According to Atlas Intel, again, one of the most accurate pollsters, Kari Lake's at 49% and Ruben Gallego's at 47%. Look, again, this isn't a prediction. I'm just reading the data, but it seems like a lot of these states aren't even going to be close. And speaking of that, here's a survey polling the most important battleground state, that's Pennsylvania, which of course has a high population and carries 19 electoral votes. There's all this talk that Pennsylvania is going to be incredibly close, but then we've got Echelon Insight releasing their latest poll showing Donald Trump leading the state by 6 at 52 to 46%. I don't know, guys. This thing might be a landslide. How can Kamala Harris win in Pennsylvania when the voter registration has shifted clearly in one direction? I mean, even John Fetterman seems to admit that Donald Trump's doing a great job connecting with voters there.
And I've been saying this, whether it was Biden or then became Harris, I said it's going to be very close. And Trump definitely has a connection with voters here in Pennsylvania, and that's why it's going to be close.
And that right there seems to be a question I keep asking myself. How can Kamala Harris win if the early voting data is so abysmal for Democrats? How can Kamala Harris win in Nevada and Arizona when she's shedding the Latino vote?
Harris, as I said, had an 18-point advantage with Latinos. Biden in the 2020 exit polls, he had a 24-point advantage over Trump 4 years ago among Latinos in Arizona. Harris is +1 with Latinos in Nevada in our poll, but according to the 2020 exit polls, Biden won them by 26 percentage points. That If that actually is what emerges on Election Day, that's a big warning sign in Nevada.
How can Kamala Harris possibly win North Carolina or win Georgia, supposedly two very close races, when she's shedding the black vote?
Let's go inside Georgia first in terms of some of the coalition groups here. Independent voters, and again, I just want to say, we're comparing likely voters in a poll and to what actually happened with voters in the 2020 exit polls. These are two different universes, but instructive. Among independent voters in our poll, Trump has a 7-point advantage in Georgia. In Georgia in 2020, Biden won independent voters by 9 points. So that's a potential warning sign there for Harris. Black voters in Georgia in our poll, 71% percentage point advantage over Trump for Harris. That's about where Biden was. He was at 77 points in the exit polls in terms of his advantage over Trump. White non-college voters down in Georgia, Trump has a 66 percentage point advantage in our poll. That is his base. We should expect to see. It's actually even bigger than his advantage was in Georgia in the exit polls, but in that range. In North Carolina, let's look at these same groups here. Among independent voters, Harris has a 4-point advantage over Trump in our poll. That's where Biden was with independent voters in the exit polls in 2020. Remember, he lost North Carolina in 2020 by a narrow margin. Black voters, 59 percentage point advantage. This is a huge potential warning sign. In the exit polls, Biden won black vote in North Carolina by 85 percentage points. Harris, this is something she's going to want to watch for in the closing days.
I don't know, guys. I'm just not buying into it. It seems like a lot of these narratives are bogus. And actually, speaking of bogus narratives, remember that whole hashtag Republicans for Harris narrative? Well, then can someone explain this to me? Now, definitely don't read too much into this data. This is ActiVote US. They're kind of a crap pollster. But just look at party affiliation. You've got Democrats supposedly voting for Kamala Harris at 83% and 17% of their Democrat respondents declaring that they're voting for Donald Trump. 17% of Democrats voting for Trump. Let that sink in for a second. Now, I don't think that's actually indicative of what's happening, but it certainly isn't helping with this whole Republicans for Harris propaganda nonsense that we've been subjected to for months. And also keep in mind that this ActiVote US poll for the last couple of months has been showing massive results for Kamala Harris, and now again, even this poll has flipped and Trump leads in their national results. And so anyways, I guess just to conclude here, quite the rapid fire cannon now, wasn't it? They want you dooming and glooming over a ridiculous Des Moines, Iowa outlier poll. Meanwhile, this is all the stuff that's dropping in the span of a couple days. Give me a frickin' break. No doom and gloom. Things are looking quite bullish. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.